Aaron Glenn's performance against the Buffalo Bills in week 2 was dismal. I'm not defending it. But Jets fans, let's keep things in perspective. Aaron Glenn is not on the hot seat. Aaron Glenn is not close to being on the hot seat. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, September 17th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. This week's questions include how much patience we should have with Jets draft picks, a lot about whether this team can establish an identity under the head coach, Aaron Glenn, and even discussions about the head coach's job status. So let's jump in. Our first question is about Aaron Glenn. John, do you get the sense that Glenn and Muji could be short-lived in their Jets tenure? Could they even be fired as soon as the 2026 season? Obviously, this season looks like it's toast, and next year they're going to have $35 million Rodgers dead cap hit on the books, along with free agent mistakes from this year like Stevens, Sherwood, and Fields. My question is somewhat hypothetical. Would two subpar / same old Jets last place seasons with no solution at quarterback ultimately do these guys in? Or do you think they're automatically granted a third year no matter what? I think we're getting way ahead of ourselves talking about Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji potentially being on the hot seat. I don't think we're close to that. To answer the question specifically, there's always a conceivable way any head coach or any GM could be fired after any season. But I think that it's very likely these guys are going to get a couple of years to try and sort this thing out. Here's the way I view it. There are two different ways we're viewing Glenn right now. One is the game to game. We're going to evaluate his performance, how he does in each individual game. And I think game 2 did a lot to merit criticism. It was an unredeemable performance for the New York Jets. There's nothing good you can say about that game. It was a dismal performance on offense, defense, special teams. The coaching did a horrible job. The players did a horrible job. I'm quoting the great Jim Mora there. But there was nothing good you could say about it. The team looked completely unprepared. And when a team looks that bad, I think you have to blame the coaching. And it was rattling to see the team play like that in game 2. There's always going to be a game you look like that during the season. If this happens, going into like October or something like that, it's a different story. But for it to happen this early in the season, when there was this much hope that the coaching staff had changed things, it's going to rattle people. But there's a second job that's more important. And it's something that transcends just the game to game. The question is, can Glenn transform this organization? Because the Jets organization has had a rotten culture for a really long time. It's been really bad. And the Jets over and over, the leadership of this team has done things the wrong way. And it's really hard to win in the NFL, even when you're doing the right things. But this Jets organization, and this goes back, it doesn't matter who the GM has been, it doesn't matter who the head coach has been for years. They've tried to take shortcuts. They've obsessed over, the splashy move that generates headlines over the sound moves that help you actually build a team. They always look for the quick fix. They always think that there's like that one move out there that's going to solve all of their problems. This was never more pronounced than a year ago, where it felt like each week early in the season brought a new attempted quick fix that was going to solve all of their problems, whether it was firing Robert Saleh, whether it was trading for Devontae Adams, whether it was ending the Hassan Reddick holdout. Week after week, the Jets thought that they had like one move that was going to save their season, and none of them did, because in the NFL, building is not about one move. It's about building an entire organization from top to bottom. You have to you have 53 players on an NFL team, and it's important to have like the high-end quarterback. That's, the most important component, but it's also important to build a good offensive line. It's important to build a good group of skill players. You want to have a quality defense. And this requires not just starters, it requires role players, it requires backups who can step in on a short-term basis. It requires guys who are willing to do the dirty work, who don't get the big numbers. It requires good special teamers. And finding these guys requires you building up a great support staff, getting coaches who can develop these guys, scouts who can find players who are under the radar talents. The Jets don't do the little things. I've heard one comparison that, running an NFL team is a lot like card maintenance. Are you really diving deep with your scouting? Are you, doing the oil change? The oil change, taking your car for an oil change is not glamorous, but it's something that keeps the car running. The Jets do all the flashy stuff with the car, but they haven't really brought the car in for the oil change frequently in the past. So with Glenn, it's about, just getting out of this cultural rot the Jets have been in. And that's hard to do because the biggest problem with the Jets culture is started at the top of the organization. All of the splashy moves that they made, all of the mindset that there's a quick fix has started with the owner. So Glenn's got to manage that. And it's very easy, it's very easy to do when you're first starting out. After you lose some games, that's where Woody Johnson starts jumping in. And that's, one of the big questions here is when the Jets have a bad streak, when the Jets have a bad season, is this where Woody Johnson decides, I'm going to take control again? And that's to me is the bigger danger than the Jets having a bad game here or there. And I think that part of being a new head coach in the NFL, and Glenn is a first-time head coach, is that it's a given that you're going to have rough moments. I mentioned this the other day that the NFL has a way of humbling you, and the NFL has a way of being more difficult than you expect it to be. And I think Aaron Glenn probably knew this going into taking the Jets head coaching job because he's been in the NFL a really long time. He was a player, he was a scout, he was an assistant coach, but he came in full of confidence. He clearly had a plan that he thought was going to work. And now we're only 2 games into his tenure, and a lot of the stuff he thought was going to work has not worked so far. And part of being successful in the NFL is not about having all the answers at the start. Part of being successful in the NFL is not about being perfect every single week. It's not about avoiding disaster. It's a question of how you respond to the tough moments. Can you, put your head down and figure out solutions when things don't go according to plan? Because I think it's clear right now, things are already not going according to plan for the New York Jets. And I think it was something we hoped would not happen, but I don't think it's completely unexpected because, again, this is a first-time head coach. And when you're dealing with a first-time head coach, when you're dealing with a guy who doesn't have experience in his position before, there are going to be growing pains. And I know nobody wants to hear about growing pains when you've missed the playoffs 14 straight years, when you've had 9 straight losing seasons. I mean, I think this fan base is out of patience, and this fan base should be out of patience. But if the Jets are going to be good, it's going to require Glenn to grow into the job in a way Robert Saleh did not do, in a way a lot of the way a lot of other Glenn predecessors did not do. It's about getting through these tough moments. You look to what happened in Detroit. The Lions have built a team that's been a contender the last couple of years. That's where Glenn came from. He was the defensive coordinator. They got off to a miserable start in Dan Campbell's first year. They were off to a miserable start, halfway through Dan Campbell's second year. Campbell, stayed true to himself. He figured out solutions, and eventually good times came. I think the question for Glenn, as much as anything, is can he get through the tough times? Because I think that Buffalo game, we hope you don't have another game that's as close to being that bad in terms of like how bad the Jets play. But there's certainly going to be other rough moments this year. This is going to be a longer term deal to turn this franchise around. And I think it's way too early to say, based on one bad game, that Glenn doesn't have what it takes. We can evaluate the game to game. That game was terrible. Glenn deserves criticism from start to finish in that game. That's different from saying definitively Glenn's not the man for the job. I think that these are 2 separate issues. The performance in week 2 speaks for itself. It was horrible. But can Glenn bounce back from that? That's the bigger and more relevant question. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about one of the most important parts and one of the most important questions Glenn will have to answer if he's going to turn things around. That's finding an identity for this football team, because the Jets' identity was shaken to its core on Sunday against Buffalo. So What can the Jets do going forward to build an identity? Well, that's what I'll talk about continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep the game moving forward. And this week's moment that moved the game forward is the loyalty of New York Jets fans. Look, I can't pick a player or coach or executive after that performance in week 2 to honor. I'm going to honor Jets fans as the people who move the game forward, because this team has done very little to deserve the support it's received from its fan base. And the Jets have the most loyal fan base in the NFL. They lose and lose and lose. They give you nothing to feel good about. Yet we keep coming back. We show loyalty. We support them. And one day, things will get turned around. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on the Jets. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. Jets are in Tampa Bay this weekend. Maybe you're heading down to Florida to watch the game. Maybe you live in Florida. Lots of Jets fans, lots of New Yorkers who have moved down to Florida. Well, Game Time is the place to get in on the action. I've used Game Time myself on many occasions. I like that they give you an all-in price. There's no hidden fees when you check out. You know exactly what you're going to pay before you buy. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL, Locked On NFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, JB, I have never seen the Jets' loss get such glowing reviews in unison as we saw week 1 when they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Fields' problems were supposed to be solved. As a starter in the NFL, Justin has a record of 14 wins and 32 losses through the end of 2024. Now it's 14 and 34. In only one season did he start all 17 games. Starting for Pittsburgh last year with a 4-2 record, he still was benched. And when given the opportunity, they let him walk away for literally nobody until they finally signed a 57-year-old Aaron Rodgers in June. I've never seen such joy from a loss before week 1. What I think is worse is how bad our defense is, which is usually, as a Jets fan, the thing we can hang our hats on. What made this Sunday most embarrassing, it was all the love in unison, all the pundits, podcasters, writers who gave this team in week 1 saw a loss. The Jets were heartless, unprepared, unmotivated, pathetic, and lost in more ways than one. 0-2 with such a great week 1 loss, though. What can we hang our hats on now? So you can sense the frustration in this question. I think that part of what made Sunday's loss so frustrating goes beyond just how badly the Jets played. It's that it was such a strike against what the team's identity was supposed to be. It was such a strike against what Aaron Glenn has been preaching since he was hired as Jets head coach back in January. Because the 2025 Jets, we knew that they were short on talent in some areas, but the idea behind this team was that they were going to be tough, they were going to be disciplined, and maybe you beat them, but they were going to give you everything you could handle. They were not going to hand you a win. If you took a win from this team, you were going to have to earn it. You were going to have to give everything you had. And instead, we saw a Jets team that came out there and just kind of handed the game to Buffalo. And I'm not saying the Jets would have won the game anyway because the Bills are a better team. I'm not saying the Bills did not make plays in that game. They certainly did. But it was disappointing to watch the way the Jets lost. Week 1, there were bad things in week 1. There were lots of undisciplined moments in week 1, if we're being honest. And I do agree that maybe the reviews after week 1 were a tad too glowing. And I think part of that was we're not used to getting a good offensive performance. So there were positives you could take. I think there were legitimate positives you could take from week 1 because the offense looked really, really good in that game. Then the defensive side of the ball, it was bad, though. it was a dreadful defensive performance. I think that letting this version of Aaron Rodgers, the guy who's 41, torch you like that, that's a real warning sign, because it's not like Rodgers made like a ton of highlight reel throws. You were just busting coverages left and right, and he made you pay for them. And that's really kind of where Rodgers is at this point of his career. He can torch you if you make mistakes, but if you force him to actually stand in the pocket, deliver under pressure, throw the ball into a tight window, he's going to have issues. The Jets made things very easy for Aaron Rodgers in week 1. So on the defensive side of the ball, they've been a team that's pretty much been easy to play against the first 2 weeks. They've been the opposite of the team that makes you earn everything. You've had to earn nothing on this defense because there are so many mistakes. And you talk about the safeties, flying out of the play. Talking about Brandon Stevens not being able to cover anybody. If we're going to be honest, Sherwood and Williams, Jamie Sherwood, Quincy Williams, the two linebackers who are supposed to be anchors of this defense, they are not playing well. They're not off to a good start. The defensive line too often not doing its job. Defense is a mess. And then that offensive performance, I mean, week 2, I think a lot of it came down to Fields. Week 1 was a good offensive performance across the board. Week 2 was a really shaky offensive performance across the board. But week 2, a lot of the issues went back to Fields. And Fields just missed throw after throw. There were opportunities for Fields to make big plays. It started on that first drive. He had Garrett Wilson wide open on the third down play. A well-designed play by the offensive coordinator, Tenure Engstrand. So, it's difficult to say. The one I'll give you like one small positive, and I don't think this necessarily goes all the way towards building an identity. The Jets did execute the zone read pretty well on Sunday, and this was an adjustment Engstrand made after the Bills threw a lot of run blitzes at the Jets early in the game. So Engstrand made this adjustment because the Bills were in particular blitzing some of their corners. So Engstrand went to the zone read, and they started assigning a blocker to each corner to take them out. And that was like the one drive where the Jets actually moved the ball. The problem was the Jets never got the ball back before it was garbage time after that series. They did have like the 1 2-minute drill, but you can't really run the zone read in the 2-minute drill. So the Jets actually had like a good offensive series, and Engstrand made a good adjustment. The problem was like the game was so far out of hand because of how bad the defense was that it really did not make a difference. So I do believe on the offensive side of the ball, you have to have like a play or two. You have to have some staple plays that you can execute in any situation. So if I'm looking for like a silver lining about maybe the Jets finding their identity in a dismal performance, maybe they found like the zone reads the play we can execute even on a day where our offense could do nothing else. But other than that, it's back to the drawing board, because this is a team that failed to find its identity. This is a team that very much played the opposite of what it wants its identity to be. It was just not good. There's no other way to put it. Our next question, John, the Buccaneers are our opponent this weekend. Their head coach is Todd Bowles, a former Jets head coach. Bowles was terrible here, yet Tampa Bay has won the division every single year. How did he improve so much? Is this just our curse that we get these guys who improve after they leave? I think there are a couple of components to this, but the one that like I've gone back to is sometimes with hindsight, we can see something that we did not see in the moment. And I think looking back at the Todd Bowles era with hindsight, he was a guy who never really had a chance here because the rosters he was given were just so dreadful. The 1 year he was given a roster that was halfway decent was 2015, and the Jets went 10-6 that year. So really the only time he had a chance, he had a winning record. And I don't want to make Todd Bowles out to be a great coach, but I always did feel like fans were a little too hard on him during his tenure here. There was actually, this is stuff that people don't remember. There was actually a pretty wide school of thought that he was the problem, that Mike McCagnon was giving him decent talent. His coaching was making the Jets underachieve, as crazy as that sounds now. But there were people who believed that at the time. I don't think anybody would admit to it now. But the Jets were just so dysfunctional. It never felt like Bowles was even consulted. If you read about what was going on with the Jets at that time, it doesn't even seem like Bowles was ever consulted on some of the personnel moves they made. I mean, they made the one trade at the trade deadline in, I think it was 2017, for Rashard Robinson. And Bowles found out about it from the media. Like, he was doing a press conference. They asked him about the trade. He's like, I didn't know we traded for somebody. The Jets were just a mess. And it goes back to what I mentioned in the first segment is, it's not just about like having one guy. It's not just about having the head coach. The entire organization needs to be on the same page. That's the front office. That's the coaching staff. That's the 53-man roster. Everybody has to be on the same page, and everybody has to be working together for an organization to work. And the Jets did not have that. Did Bowles make mistakes here? Of course he did. I think some of his staffing decisions were very bad. I think there were many cases where he made bad assistant hires, particularly at his coordinator roles. And I think that has improved in Tampa Bay. He's got back-to-back offensive coordinators who have gotten head coaching jobs. And I think maybe, inheriting the team from Bruce Arians helped him on that path. Maybe it made it a little easier for Bowles to see what he needed in an offensive coordinator. I'm sure Bowles has reflected on some of the things that went wrong here. I mean, there were lots of instances of undisciplined play here that I think have been cut down in Tampa Bay. So, I don't want to make it sound like I think Bowles did a good job here, because I think in a lot of areas he was deficient. But in hindsight, and this is not something that I think I could have known or you could have known or any of us could have known at the time, Bowles was probably a better coach than we realized here. It's just he never really had a chance because the Jets were so dysfunctional. And that's, I think, a big part of the story as to why things did not go well here. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about patience for Jets draft picks. I'm not going to lie, I did take the Jets draft class of 2025 to task a little bit on yesterday's show, and maybe I went a little bit overboard. One of our questions calls me out on it. I think the question may be right. So we'll go into that as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel fits however you like to bet: player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sunday. So let's look ahead to this Sunday. The Jets heading to Tampa Bay is their first road game of the season. I think the Jets might be happy to get away from MetLife Stadium after what happened on Sunday. At least there won't be the same level of boos in the crowd. There is an underdog role for the Jets, though, this weekend. They are 6.5-point road underdogs with an over-under of 44.5 for this game on FanDuel. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question. On Tuesday's pod, you talked about the rookie class being disappointing and a bad start for Muji's drafting. I know you said it's an early progress report, but I think it's still way too early to factor in rookie contributions. Membu is performing. Tight ends always take time to transition. Thomas was best player available, but not slated to start this year, and fourth round and later usually never contribute starting right away. Also factor in that Muji had to use the previous regime scouts for the draft because he did not have time to bring in his own guys. I agree free agent signings are missing, but give the young guys a little bit more time. We talk about holding people accountable. As Aaron Glenn holding people accountable. I think this question's holding me accountable, and this is why you have to hold people accountable. I think it's a fair point. I think maybe I let my frustration with the Jets get the better of me a little bit yesterday. It was a very disappointing loss, as you know, to Buffalo. Maybe I went a little overboard with the rookies. I think that's a fair point. The broader point I was trying to make, I think, and maybe I misfired on this, was I think that it's a troubling sign for me that none of the guys Glenn and Muji brought in are contributing in a positive way right now. So, we're looking for like silver linings here. And if like the guys they brought in were playing well and it was like the solid Douglas players who were failing, you could say, okay, we just got to get more guys in here. It's just when we make more changes, we'll be okay. That's not happening right now. And I think it's more focused. I probably should have focused it more on the free agent signings, because Brandon Stevens just looks awful so far. Andre Sisco has been a disappointment. And we know Justin Fields had one good game, but one horrendous game. And those were like the big moves the Jets made this offseason. And then none of like the under the radar moves are really producing much. What I would say about the draft picks, though, are, you want to see more than the first round pick contributing right away. I'm not expecting every single player the Jets drafted to be great right off the bat, but I would like to see like one or two guys look really good outside of Armand Membu. And this is one thing I mentioned yesterday, is that you can't expect every single player to develop. So you want some early progress. And yeah, most like day 3 picks don't contribute right away, but you like to have like one exception in there. I don't need every single guy to contribute, but I'd like to have one exception. And that's particularly true because I think the Jets made some picks at the time that were a bit head scratching based on what we knew. And the Jets kind of like gave you the idea, look, we have more information on these guys. We have roles in mind. They said that about Arian Smith. They said, we've got a role in mind for Arian Smith. Well, what's the role? I mean, is it just to, run that end around where he loses 10 yards? He's getting less snaps than Tyler Johnson right now, who's a guy who is a backup level player. Malachi Moore, I think Malachi Moore is my hope. But he had a rough moment on the James Cook 44-yard touchdown run. Tyler Barron, again, that was one I questioned, and I think part of it's like I tried to give the Jets the benefit of the doubt, but now like we're 2 weeks into the season, and Tyler Barron's doing nothing. So it's not so much like any individual player. It's just like I want to see like some sign for hope. I want one of these guys to produce, but it is only 2 games in, and maybe I should have focused. Maybe I just should have focused entirely on the free agent signings. So I think that's a fair point. Maybe I should backtrack a little bit. I do have some concerns about the draft class, but I should have focused more on just the free agent signings, because the free agent signings are really disturbing. Brandon Stevens was the one where they went out on a limb and they essentially said, trust us. And that trust is not being rewarded. And that's I think that more than the draft picks are what are troubling. But thank you for holding me accountable. That's what you got to do. Aaron Glenn's got to hold his players accountable. You got to hold me accountable. So that's good job. Good question. Our next question from Dan: when you review film, what's your process? Do you watch the all 22s multiple times, focusing on specific players or position groups, or do you watch 1 or 2 times to see what jumps out at you? In the NFL, where they review film, are they watching 11 to 22 times to see what everyone did on every play? To answer the last question, yeah, I mean they're very thorough in the NFL. Your position coaches are like reviewing every play multiple times. They're kind of great. As a player, you get graded, so they pick apart like everything very intricate way, and you have a lot of different eyes on the film, because the team has to evaluate its own players. So the NFL, like every play is getting watched over multiple times. Position coaches are watching for their position groups, the coordinators and the head coaches are watching to see how the units are performing as a whole. And there's that's how they spend a lot of their days. There's a lot of film study in the NFL. For me, it depends on the week. Usually what I do is there were some plays that like I was interested in the game. Usually they're like the big plays, like the big touchdowns or the big conversions, or maybe just a play that I noticed that I was like interested to see like what really happened on it. So usually I'll start with that, but then what I'll do is I'll just like watch all the offensive plays in one sitting, then maybe take a break and watch all the defensive plays in one sitting, and then see what jumps out at me about those plays. And some of the plays that are interesting, if I can't like figure out what went on, I'll watch it a couple of times, but that's kind of my process. Filming can be interesting because sometimes the film can like completely change your perspective on what happened on a given play. I'll give you an example of that. So like on Monday's show, and one of the things, like when I do these game recaps, I always try and preface it with, I haven't seen the film yet. And when you actually see the film, your opinion can change based on what you saw live. I was very critical of the way the Jets handled an early play when Josh Allen scrambled for 40 yards on third down. I said the Jets were undisciplined. I watched it over, and I think the reason Allen had a lane was Michael Clemens was held. And I'm not like the biggest Clemens fan in the world, but I think the officials blew a call there. And I think that the Jets maybe didn't handle that as poorly as I initially thought. And I think that's the reason like the film can be important. Is sometimes you watch it live and you miss something. And I think that's why the film's worth watching. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have crossover Thursday. We'll preview Jets Buccaneers Week 3 action. Talk to you then.